I want you to picture a specific place with me for a second. Let's say it's
Ah,
1998. You're walking into the Century Third Mall in West Mifflin, Pennsylvania, and this place it's just massive. I mean, we are talking about a structure the size of a small city.
It's a sensory imprint, isn't it? A
Right,
lot
it's
of us have that
just
locked in our brains.
Yes. You hear the fountains, and they had these huge, like, multi-story fountains, and you just hear the murmur of thousands of people. The air smells like that very specific mix of chlorinated water, Annie Ann's pretzels, and, department store perfume.
It's the sound and the smell of American commerce at its absolute peak. It's a very distinct memory.
Right. Okay, so now, fast forward, it's 2019. You walk into that exact same space. The skylights are cracked. They're letting in water. There's a layer of dust on the fake ficus trees.
Mhm.
The fountains are bone dry. And the tiles, these like famous blueberry colored tiles that the Century the Third had, they're just covered in debris. And it's silent. It is dead silent. You are standing in a space built for noise, for crowds, and all you can hear is your own breathing.
It's an incredibly jarring contrast. And Century Third is, I think, the perfect place to start because it wasn't just a mall. At one point, it was the third largest shopping mall in the world.
Third largest in the world.
It went from a global titan to eventually the world's largest abandoned structure of its kind,
Yeah.
at least before they finally started demolition. It's the entire life cycle in one building.
And that's the journey we're taking today. We are doing a deep dive into the world of dead malls. And I want to be really clear right from the start. This isn't just about why you can't buy a pair of jeans at the local Gap anymore. We're not just doing a nostalgia trip.
No, not at all, although the nostalgia is a really potent part of why we're so fascinated by this.
Mm-hmm.
What we're really looking at here is a massive structural shift in our economy, in urban planning, and frankly, in how we interact with each other as a community.
We've got a whole stack of sources here that go way, way beyond that simple headline of Amazon killed the mall. We're going to look at the legal contracts that basically act like trapdoors for these buildings, the vulture capitalists who actually profit from letting them rot, and then the really strange second lives that some of these concrete behemoths are finding.
And I think it's important we define our terms first,
Mhm.
because when we say dead mall, we aren't just being poetic or dramatic.
Right. Is there a technical definition for this? Or is it just a vibe? The difference between I can't find a parking spot and I can park right by the front door.
There's a little more to it than that, yeah. In the industry, a dead mall, you'll also hear terms like grayfield or zombie mall, is usually defined by high vacancy rates. We're talking 40% or more,
40%, so almost half empty.
at least. And that's combined with low consumer traffic and, of course, deteriorating physical conditions. But the real marker, the sort of clinical definition of death, it almost always starts with the anchor stores.
Okay, let's get into that. The anatomy of the collapse. Because I think most people, myself included, just assume a mall dies because people stop showing up. But when you look at the lease structures in these sources, it feels like the death is almost, I don't know, contractually programmed into them from the start.
It really is.
Mm.
To understand why a mall dies, you have to understand how it was built, financially speaking. The entire ecosystem, the whole model, relies on those anchors, the Macy's, the Sears, the J.C. Penney's of the world.
The big boxes at the ends of the hallways, the main attractions.
Exactly. But here's the thing that I find surprises most people. Those big giant stores, they essentially pay nothing in rent.
Wait, hold on a second. They take up the most prime real estate. They've got the massive signage. You're telling me they aren't paying the most rent?
In a lot of the classic mall deals, they pay zero rent. Or they own their own building outright and just pay a very small fee for common area maintenance, keeping the parking lot paved, paying for the lights, that sort of thing. The mall developer gives them this unbelievable sweetheart deal because they are the bait.
The bait. That's a good way to put it.
They're there to draw the traffic. You go to the mall specifically to buy a refrigerator at Sears, but on your way from the parking lot to Sears, you pass the Gap, you pass the candle store, you pass the pretzel stand. Those are the inline tenants,
Okay.
and they are the ones paying massive rent premiums. I mean, sometimes 10, even 20 times more per square foot than an anchor would, because what they're really paying for is access to the foot traffic that Sears is supposed to be generating.
So the pretzel stand is effectively subsidizing the giant department store.
Financially, yes, that's the model. The small stores are the profit engine for the developer. The big stores are the fuel that makes the engine run. But this creates a huge, huge vulnerability. It's something called a co-tenancy clause.
I saw this term pop up again and again in the legal briefs we looked at. You have to break this down for us because this really does seem to be the smoking gun.
It is the trap door I mentioned. A co-tenancy clause is a little piece of text, in the lease contract for all those smaller stores, the Sunglass Hut, the GameStop, whoever. And it basically says, I, the small store owner, agree to pay this incredibly high rent, but only if the anchor stores are open and operating.
Oh. Oh, I see exactly where this is going.
It creates a catastrophic domino effect. Let's say Sears closes its doors. It's just one store out of 100, right? It seems manageable. But the moment it closes, that co-tenancy clause can trigger for, say, 20 other stores in that wing of the mall.
And what does that mean, trigger?
It means they are now legally allowed to break their leases and just leave without any penalty. Or, more commonly, they can switch from paying their high fixed rent to paying a much, much smaller percentage of their sales. And if sales are already down, that's next to nothing.
So the mall owner doesn't just lose the one big anchor. They instantly lose all the financial leverage they had over the entire building.
Overnight. Your revenue doesn't just dip, it drops off a cliff. But the cost to run that mall, the electricity for those giant open spaces, the security guards, the massive HVAC systems needed to heat and cool 1 million square feet, that stays exactly the same.
And that's when the death spiral starts. Because if you can't pay to fix the air conditioning, the mall gets hot and miserable in the summer. If you can't pay for security, it starts to feel unsafe. And then even more people stop coming.
Precisely. It's a financial mechanism that just dramatically accelerates the decline. It turns a stumble into an absolute freefall. The building is designed to bleed out.
But we still have to ask why the anchors started failing in the first place. I mean, the easy answer is always the internet. We all just started clicking add to cart. But the timeline doesn't fully support that, does it? The problems started earlier.
No, not at all. The cracks were showing long before Amazon Prime shipping became a daily habit for millions. Before we even get to the internet, we have to talk about the category killers.
The category killers. That sounds like a 90s action movie villain.
It's a brutal term, but it was a brutal business shift. We're talking about the rise of the big box chains. Your Walmart, your Target, Best Buy, Home Depot. In the 90s and especially the early 2000s, these stores completely changed the geometry of American shopping.
Because they didn't want to be inside the mall.
No. I mean, just think about the logistics. If you're going to Best Buy to get a new 60-inch TV, do you really want to park in a massive garage, walk through a food court, maybe take an escalator, and then try to drag that enormous box all the way back out?
Absolutely not. No, I want to pull my car right up to the curb, have someone help me load it in, and drive away.
Exactly. The category killers prefer their own purpose-built freestanding buildings, or these things called power centers, which are just collections of big box stores with a giant shared parking lot. This change pulled all the utility shopping, the electronics, the home goods, the basic clothing. It pulled it right out of the enclosed mall. The mall was then left with just lifestyle shopping, things you don't strictly need.
Which is a much harder, much more fickle market to sustain. And then on top of that, you have the lifestyle center trend itself.
Which is really just a fancy modern term for an open-air mall that's designed to look like a sort of fake, idealized Main Street.
I feel like every suburb in America has one of these now. It's got the nice wide sidewalks, maybe a fountain in the middle, some pleasant music piped in. But you can drive right up to the individual stores. It feels less claustrophobic than an old mall.
It feels more efficient. And in most of the United States, developers pivoted very, very hard toward this model. Now, it's worth noting the climate difference that some of the sources point out. In Canada, for instance, the classic enclosed mall is still holding on much stronger.
Because it's freezing for half the year.
Right. For them, the enclosed mall is a climate solution. If you're in Montreal or Toronto in February, you absolutely want to be indoors. But if you're in Texas or Florida or Southern California, that open-air lifestyle center is much more appealing year-round.
But there's a bigger sort of macroeconomic factor at play here that we just can't ignore, and it's the simple fact that we just built too many of them. Way too many.
The oversupply data from Cowen Research was, as you said earlier, just staggering.
It's hard to wrap your head around. I mean, get this. Between 1970 and 2015, the amount of mall square footage in the U.S. grew more than twice as fast as the population.
Let that sink in. Twice as fast.
So we didn't have twice as many people, and our wages certainly didn't double in real terms during that period, but for some reason we decided we needed twice the retail space. It makes no sense.
The United States has, per capita, 40% more shopping space than Canada. And get this, 5 times more than the United Kingdom.
5 times? Why? I mean, was it just boundless American optimism? A belief that the boom would never end?
It was partly that, but it was also tax policy. This gets a little into the weeds, but We have to look at something called the Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981.
Okay, translate that for those of us who are not accountants.
Basically, the government created a massive tax shelter for commercial real estate development. It allowed developers to depreciate the value of a commercial building over just 15 years, which is an incredibly accelerated timeline.
Meaning they could get a huge tax write-off every year.
A colossal one. You could literally build a mall, lose money on the day-to-day operations, but make an absolute fortune by writing off the building's depreciation against your other taxable income.
Yeah.
It incentivized building malls that didn't even need to be profitable on their own terms to make the developers incredibly rich.
So we flooded the market with an artificial supply of retail space, driven by tax loopholes, not actual consumer demand.
Exactly. And eventually, those tax loopholes started to close, the financial bill came due, and we were left with a landscape just saturated with these retail cathedrals that suddenly had no congregation. The year 2007 was the very first year since the 1950s that not a single new enclosed mall was built in the entire United States.
That date really marks the end of an era. The bubble had officially popped.
It did. But what happens next, as these places start to fail, is where the story gets really dark. Because for some of these malls, the death isn't from natural causes. In some cases, it's murder.
This brings us to the section on demolition by neglect. And I have to say, reading about some of these companies like Namdar Realty Group or Moonbeam Capital, it honestly just made me angry. It feels so incredibly cynical.
It is deeply cynical, but in their eyes, it's just cold math. To understand it, we have to talk about the concept of a covered land play.
Explain that, because my logic is, if I buy a business, I want that business to succeed. Why on earth would I buy a multi-million-dollar mall just to stand by and let the roof leak?
Because the business isn't the mall. The business is the dirt underneath the mall. Let's say you have a dying mall that's sitting on 50 acres of prime real estate, right next to a major highway interchange. The building itself is becoming a liability. It costs millions a year just to heat and cool. But the land, in a growing suburb, that land is gold.
So the building is actually in the way of the real asset.
Precisely. So a covered land play is when an investor, often a private equity firm or a specialized group, buys the property not for the rental income from the remaining tenants, but because the value of the land itself exceeds the purchase price of the whole property.
So they're betting on the future.
They're betting that eventually that mall will have to be demolished, and they can sell that huge parcel of land for a massive profit to someone who wants to build condos or an Amazon warehouse or a big mixed-use development.
Okay, so in the meantime, while they wait for the right moment to rezone or sell, what did they do with the building?
They harvest the asset. This is the demolition by neglect part. Companies like Namdar or Mason Asset Management, and to be fair, they always dispute these characterizations, but the pattern is documented across dozens of properties. They buy them all for pennies on the dollar out of foreclosure. Then they slash the operating budget for security, for cleaning, for maintenance, down to almost zero.
So every single dollar of rent they collect from the few tenants who are still trapped there is basically pure profit because they aren't spending a dime on upkeep.
That's the strategy. They squeeze the last remaining drops of life out of the lemon. If the main HVAC unit breaks, they don't fix it. If the parking lot develops craters the size of a small car, they just leave them. They cut costs by disabling safety components like fire suppression systems.
That sounds exactly like being a slumlord.
It is effectively commercial slumland tactics. They're extracting every bit of cash value while the physical asset deteriorates around them. And here's the most cynical part. Eventually, the condition gets so bad that the city might condemn the building, or the last remaining tenants just give up and flee. And that actually helps the developer.
It helps them to have an empty, condemned building. How?
Sure. Think about it. If you want to bulldoze the place and build 1,000 new apartments, the hardest and most expensive part is often buying out the leases of the existing stores. But if you make the mall so unbearable to be in, it's 95 degrees inside in July, there's no security, the roof is leaking onto their merchandise, the tenants leave on their own, you clear the building for free.
That is diabolical. You are essentially torturing your own tenants so that they evict themselves.
It's a strategy known as distressed asset management. And you can see the scars of this all over the country. Look at Harbor Place in Baltimore or the Burlington Center in New Jersey. And you see these companies try to pull off these little Band-Aid fixes to pretend they're trying to keep the city off their back. The Eat at National Place Food Hall in D.C. is a perfect example from our sources.
I remember reading about that one. They just slapped a trendy food hall into a dying downtown shopping center.
It's the classic lipstick on a pig maneuver. The mall had fundamental structural and traffic flow issues. The architecture was obsolete. Putting in a few trendy food stalls doesn't fix the fact that there are no anchor tenants and the layout is a maze. It was a superficial fix that, of course, failed within 2 years, and the whole place closed.
It's just kicking the can down the road while you squeeze out the last bit of cash. So we have this perfect storm. We've got the structural setup for failure with the co-tenancy clauses, and then we have these predatory owners accelerating the decay. And then on top of all that, you have the accelerants. We touched on the internet, but the sources point to two very specific major events: the Great Recession and, of course, COVID-19.
The 1-2 punch that really finished the job for a lot of these places. The Great Recession in 2008 fundamentally changed the consumer psyche in America. Before that, the sort of useless luxury purchase was a standard part of American life. You went to the mall to browse, to buy a gadget from the sharper image you didn't really need.
Or a $50 candle, or another hoodie from Abercrombie.
Right. It was entertainment. After 2008, with millions out of work, the consumer shifted dramatically toward value. We saw the explosive growth of TJ Maxx, Ross, the off-price retailers. These stores don't typically anchor huge enclosed malls. They sit in more efficient, cheaper strip centers. The whole habit of just strolling and browsing started to die off because people felt guilty about spending money they didn't have on things they didn't need.
And people just had less time, too. The efficiency of a big box store or a strip mall became more valuable.
That's a huge point. Time became a major factor. But then, just as things were starting to stabilize into this new normal, came COVID.
Which was the gasoline on an already raging fire.
It didn't start the fire, but it absolutely poured gasoline on it. It wasn't just the temporary lockdowns forcing these places to close for months. It was the precarious financial state of the retailers entering the pandemic. A lot of these classic mall brands, JCPenney, Neiman Marcus, J.Crew, Brooks Brothers, were already loaded up with billions in debt, often from private equity buyouts in the years before.
So they were basically living paycheck to paycheck as multi-billion-dollar corporations.
That's a great way to put it. They had no cash cushion. So when their revenue suddenly hit zero for 3 straight months, they just collapsed. We saw this massive wave of bankruptcies in 2020 that cleared out hundreds of the remaining anchor stores all at once. Places like Northgate Mall in North Carolina, Cascade Mall in Washington, Metro Center in Arizona. They didn't just struggle, they closed the doors for good. The pandemic was the final fatal blow.
So that brings us to today. We're left with the corpses, these massive gray concrete boxes sitting on hundreds of acres of cracked asphalt. And this brings us to what I think is the most fascinating part of this whole story, the afterlife. Because unlike a house, you can't just flip a mall.
No. This is the challenge of the gray field. That's the technical term.
Right, define that for us again.
So a green field is undeveloped, open land, a meadow, a forest. It's easy to build on. A gray field, on the other hand, is land that has already been developed and paved over a former mall, an old airport, a giant factory. Reusing it is incredibly difficult, primarily because of the architecture of the existing structure.
I've heard so many people ask, why don't we just turn them into homeless shelters or affordable housing? It seems so obvious. You have a roof, you have plumbing, you have heat. Why is it so hard to do that?
It really comes down to a simple problem of geometry. Malls, and especially the department stores within them, have what architects call deep floor plates.
Deep floor plates. Explain what that means.
Think about an old Sears or a Macy's building. It's a giant solid square, maybe 300 feet by 300 feet. Now imagine trying to chop that up into individual apartments. The units you put along the outside walls would have windows. But what about all the apartments in the middle?
They'd have no windows, no natural light.
Exactly. You'd have dozens of units in the center of the building that are just windowless boxes.
Yeah.
You can't legally or humanely house people like that. It violates all sorts of building and health codes.
So to make it work for housing, you'd have to completely gut the building, carve it up.
You'd have to do massive architectural surgery. You'd have to slice the roof off, carve out huge central courtyards to bring light into the middle, punch dozens of new holes in the structure for light wells. It is astronomically expensive. In many cases, it is literally cheaper to tear the entire mall down to the ground and build new apartments from scratch than it is to try and retrofit the existing concrete shell.
That makes perfect sense when you explain it like that. But there are exceptions. There are other uses. Let's look at scenario A, the corporate takeover. The sources brought up the Rackspace example, which is pretty famous.
Yes, the old Windsor Park Mall in San Antonio. This is one of the most successful and well-known mall conversions. Rackspace, which is a big cloud computing company, took over the entire dead mall and turned it into their global headquarters.
That seems like a pretty perfect fit for a certain kind of tech company. The big open spaces, the slightly weird 80s architecture. It's kind of cool and quirky.
Yeah. It works for a modern office because you don't need a window in every single cubicle. You can have meeting rooms, conference spaces, and server closets in the windowless core of the building. And the old food court. That becomes the new company cafeteria. It's a self-contained corporate campus with a ton of personality.
And there's another more technical reason why tech companies actually love old malls, specifically for things like data centers.
The floor load capacity.
It's the floor load.
Malls, especially the department stores, were built to withstand incredible weight. You have to account for thousands of shoppers, heavy shelving, tons of merchandise, sometimes even car shows on the second floor. That concrete structure is incredibly robust. So if you want to fill a building with rows and rows of heavy servers or massive heavy battery backups for a data center, a mall is perfect. It's already over-engineered.
So the Allegheny Center Mall in Pittsburgh becoming a major carrier hotel, which is basically a giant hub for the internet, that isn't an accident.
No, it's a matter of structural destiny. It has the heavy-duty power hookups from its time as a retail center. It has loading docks for bringing in equipment, and it has the floor strength. That building is now the physical backbone of the internet for that entire region of the country.
It's just so ironic. The internet is what helped kill the retail mall, and now the physical infrastructure of the internet is literally living inside the corpse of the mall.
It is the ultimate conquest, isn't it? And you see the same exact thing with Amazon taking over old Sears and JCPenney locations to use them as fulfillment and distribution centers. They are using the carcass of the old retail giant to power the operations of the new one.
But not every mall can become a server farm. Scenario B in our notes is community and public service. We're talking schools and churches.
This is happening everywhere, especially in smaller towns. The Eastgate Metroplex in Tulsa was largely converted to educational use. The old Lexington Mall in Kentucky became a huge satellite worship center for a local megachurch.
Why does that particular use work so well?
Again, just think about the space. What does a megachurch need? They need a massive, windowless auditorium for their main services. That's a former department store. They need lots and lots of smaller rooms for classrooms and childcare. Those are the old inline stores. And most importantly, they need thousands and thousands of parking spots for everyone to show up at 11 a.m. on a Sunday morning.
The parking really is the secret weapon, isn't it?
In North American urban planning, parking is destiny. If you were to build a new church or school of that size from scratch, the cost of the land and building an underground garage can be tens of millions of dollars. It can cost $40,000 to $60,000 per parking space to dig a garage. A mall comes with thousands of surface parking spaces for free. That is a massive, massive asset.
Which also explains Scenario C mall to medicine. This is a huge new trend. The Vanderbilt Health example in Nashville really stuck out to me. They took over half of the 100 Oaks Mall.
Half the mall. And in doing so, they completely saved the other half. They put in all their outpatient clinics, ambulatory surgery centers, and administrative offices into the second floor and the old anchor store spaces. And suddenly, you have thousands of doctors, nurses, staff, and patients circulating through that building every single day.
And all of those people need to eat lunch, buy a coffee, maybe pick up a gift from the gift shop.
Exactly. It completely revitalized the remaining retail on the first floor. But the reason Vanderbilt and other health systems do it is all about speed and cost. To build a brand new medical tower can take years of planning and construction and costs a fortune. Retrofitting a mall is much faster, the parking is already there, and the floors, again, are already strong enough for heavy equipment like MRI machines and CT scanners.
It's a health mall, one-stop shopping for your body. You go get your blood drawn, see a specialist, and then go buy a new pair of shoes downstairs.
It's becoming a major trend. The University of Rochester Medical Center is doing the same thing, converting a third of the Marketplace Mall. It fundamentally turns the mall from a place of recreational spending into a place of essential services.
And finally, when all else fails, there's the demoling option, which is basically just tearing the roof off.
The scrape and rebuild, or at least a partial scrape. You see this at places like the Springfield Town Center in Virginia. They try to turn the enclosed fortress into something that feels more like a traditional street grid. They'll demolish the old department stores entirely to put in parks or apartment buildings.
Like that example of DeBartolo Commons at the Southern Park Mall in Ohio, they tore down a Sears and just built a big grassy lawn.
Which is incredibly symbolic, isn't it? The physical space that for 50 years was dedicated to selling you washing machines and Craftsman tools is now just grass. It's a public space to just sit. It's a total reversal of purpose.
This all brings us to the final part of our deep dive today, the cultural legacy. Because even after these places die, and even after they're torn down, we can't seem to look away. We are obsessed with images of these places in decay.
The dead mall aesthetic. It's a huge subculture online. There are entire communities dedicated to it.
I have to admit, I've watched hours of the Dan Bell videos on YouTube, the Dead Mall series. Him walking through a dark, abandoned mall with that eerie vaporwave music playing.
Yeah.
It's just mesmerizing.
It taps into a concept that philosophers and cultural critics call hauntology.
Hauntology. That sounds like a ghost story class in college.
It's a philosophical concept, yeah. It was popularized by the late critic Mark Fisher. And the basic idea is that our present is haunted by the lost futures of the past. When you look at a dead mall, you aren't just looking at trash and debris. You're looking at a failed vision of the future.
A very specific vision of the future, one where we all lived in the suburbs and drove our station wagons to the mall, and consumption was the main form of entertainment, and everything was going to be perfect forever.
Exactly. The mall was the physical center of the 20th century American dream. So to see it rotting, to see it collapsing in on itself, it suggests that maybe the dream itself has rotted. That's why it feels so liminal.
We mentioned the term liminal space earlier, that feeling of being in a transitional space, a place between places.
Right. An airport at 3 a.m., an empty school hallway during summer vacation. A mall is a space that is designed from the ground up to be filled with people, with noise, with activity. Without people, the architecture feels fundamentally wrong. It glitches our brains. It's a space that is perpetually waiting for something, for shoppers, for life that is never going to happen again.
The documentary Jasper Mall from 2020 captured this feeling perfectly. It's not a horror movie, it's just profoundly sad. It's about the few people who are still there, the manager, the security guards, sweeping the floors, just waiting for customers who aren't coming back.
It's a memento mori, a reminder of death. But instead of a skull sitting on a scholar's desk, it's a boarded-up Sparrow in a food court.
Memento mori with a food court. I'm still claiming that for a t-shirt. But this whole thing raises a really big question for me as we start to wrap this up. If the mall is dying, where do we go now? What replaced it?
That is the town square problem, and it's a huge one.
We always referred to the mall as the new American town square. But it wasn't really a town square, was it?
No. And this is a really crucial distinction that urbanists make. A real town square is public space. You have a right to be there. You can protest there. You can sit on a bench all day without spending a single dollar. A mall is what's known as a POPS, a privately owned public space.
Meaning you have no real rights there. It just looks public.
Exactly. If you try to hold up a protest sign in a mall, security will kick you out. If you're a teenager who doesn't look like you're actively shopping, they'll tell you to move along. It was a sanitized, controlled, privatized version of community. It was community as a commodity.
So now that that particular privatized version is failing, are we getting a real town square back? Or are we all just retreating back into our houses?
Well, that's the fear, isn't it? The fear is that we are simply trading the physical POPS for the digital POPS. We gather on Twitter or Instagram or TikTok, which are also privately owned spaces that exist to monetize our attention and sell our data instead of gathering in the food court.
We traded the food court for the comment section.
And I am not at all convinced that's an upgrade for society. At least at the mall, you had to physically be in the presence of your neighbors. You saw people who weren't like you. There was a chance for serendipitous interaction.
So as we look at this new landscape, the Amazon warehouses where the Sears used to be, the medical centers and the old department stores, the empty shelves waiting for the wrecking ball, it's pretty clear that the era of the retail cathedral is well and truly over.
It is. We are in the middle of a massive shift from an era of going out to an era of delivery. The entire physical infrastructure of our country is being rewired in real time to support that new reality.
It's a lot to think about the next time you drive past that empty Sears on the highway. It's not just an empty store. It's a monument to a way of life that has, quite literally, left the building.
And it's not coming back.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. It's been weirdly heavy, but absolutely fascinating.
My pleasure. It was great to talk about.
Stay curious, everyone.